Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
Susano Vega, one of the wealthiest and most influential individuals in the region, was deep in his thoughts, sitting at a lavishly set table in an expensive luxury restaurant. The banquet in honor of the centenary of the brick factory required his presence, whether he liked it or not. He couldn't leave before the governor did. After all, he was the head of the factory and the largest company in the region, Start, which had originated from that very factory back in the distant 90s. And the governor was in no hurry to depart. It was evident that he was enjoying the atmosphere, and Susano Vega was a significant, one could say, key figure for him. Susano had supported the governor extensively during his pre-election campaign, both financially and with human resources. The governor respected Susano and perhaps even feared him. Only Susano himself struggled to endure the grand regional event that had started the day. And now he had to endure the banquet to the bitter end, wearing a mask of grandeur and pride. The media had been hounding him relentlessly right up until the banquet. They were taking photos and asking questions about the future. Meanwhile, Susano's thoughts were constantly drifting back to the past, which he couldn't change. Thankfully, those persistent reporters were kept at bay in the restaurant. They simply weren't allowed in. But even without them, today's proceedings weighed heavily on the company owner. When would the governor finally depart so that Susano could follow suit in peace? And why was Margarita constantly hovering around him? Perhaps that's the reason he couldn't leave? Margarita was Susano's second wife, and he had found solace in her after Valeriana's death. He had lived nearly 30 years together with his first wife. They had gone through thick and thin together, as they say. She had been more than a wife to him. She was a faithful friend, an ally, and a reliable support. But he hadn't been able to save her. 2 years ago, her battle with cancer ended in complete defeat. His beloved Valeriana had passed away. Millions of dollars and the best doctors from around the world had been of no help. How insignificant Susano felt back then. Margarita had appeared during his darkest moments and had breathed new life into the grieving widower. Her youth and energy had revived the desolate man. And 3 months ago, he had decided to marry again, even though it had cost him his good relationship with his only daughter, Natalia. However, Natalia had always been spoiled and capricious. Money spoils children, Susano was now certain of that. Education abroad, endless travels, almost no refusal of any whims, none of it had benefited Natalia. He had only realized this too late, after Valeriana was no longer there, his support, especially in the matter of raising their daughter. His wife had always been convinced that Natalia, despite her caprices, was a responsible and sensible person. Perhaps the death of her mother had influenced her this way? Margarita had opened Susano's eyes to the true state of affairs concerning Valeriana. And these revelations had been painful. His daughter was spending vast sums on unclear projects, associating herself with dubious companies, and ignoring any of her father's concerns. Of course, she was unhappy with her stepmother, who was only 7 years her senior, and had tried to dissuade her father from marrying her. He could understand that, but he had made his own decision. And that decision shattered his relationship with his daughter. Sometimes, Susano had doubts about whether he had made the right choice. But more often than not, Margarita gave him love, cared about him, and supported him, and he so desperately needed it. For instance, even now, when he didn't want to interact with the governor, his wife gladly stepped in, and it was clear that the governor enjoyed her company. Susano realized that his thoughts were contradicting themselves. Sometimes he didn't like that Margarita was hovering around the governor, and other times he found himself content with it. What nonsense was this? Nevertheless, the main cause of his deep contemplation and sorrow today was not his wife's death, not his strained relationship with his daughter, not his exhaustion from the centennial celebration, but something entirely different. Today, they celebrated the centenary of the brick factory. Susano had bought it with his friend Acacio Diaz back in the early 90s for a pittance, as he had once mentioned. In reality, the amount was, of course, substantial, and it hadn't been easy for the two young friends to gather it. Nevertheless, they took the risk, borrowed money at interest from local authorities, and purchased an already closed and semi-dilapidated factory built in the early 20th century. They managed to restore, revive, and transform it into a successful enterprise in a relatively short time. That's how the two friends started their business. Discovering his entrepreneurial talent, Susano and Acacio acquired several other closed production facilities in the city, but now they owned them separately. Acacio became the owner of a bakery and a dairy plant. Susano acquired a factory for producing construction mixtures and a construction materials base. Over the course of a decade, both friends managed to amass substantial wealth. Susano named his company Start and defined the direction of his work clearly. Later, he also opened a construction company, which quickly gained momentum. Acacio's business focused on the production and sale of bread and milk. Later, his company EcoProduct ventured into growing vegetables and fruits, but this area still required further development. In general, EcoProduct thrived and brought in a substantial income. Gradually, the two friends started to communicate less. Each of them was more involved with people who were beneficial to their respective businesses. However, their rare meetings were pleasant for both of them until the question of dividing their joint enterprise, the brick factory, came up. Acacio had refused to support Susano's plan to modernize the facility and declined to sell his share. Acacio, stop being so stubborn. Brick production doesn't align with your primary line of work. You've moved into the food eco business. Sell me your share. I have big plans. I'll install new production lines for colored bricks, Susano argued. Susano, I'm sorry, but I have a son who's interested in the construction industry. So, I'd like him to inherit my share, Acacio replied. When Susano failed once again to negotiate the sale of the factory share, he decided to send his assistants for further talks. His deputy had convinced him to do so. He didn't know that his assistants had found some special leverage they intended to use against Acacio to force him into the deal. Essentially, it resembled blackmail, but Susano only learned about it later. At that time, Susano was preoccupied with his wife's health, so he didn't investigate the details of the upcoming negotiations. How could you do such a thing? Acacio exclaimed angrily over the phone. Your people threatened me and my family, do you understand? I didn't expect this from you. You've robbed me. Then the connection was unexpectedly cut off. When Susano returned with his dying wife, the first news he received was about the deaths of Acacio and his wife, Marina, in a car accident. This shocked him, but he didn't have time to figure out what had happened. The next day, his beloved Valeriana passed away. He poorly remembered the first days after his wife's death. Immediately after the funeral, he took his daughter on a trip to an island in the ocean, thinking it would help him recover. But it didn't. A couple of weeks later, he returned and tried to focus on work, but he couldn't. Depression and apathy took hold of him once again. He delegated everything to his deputies. They assured him that everything was proceeding according to the long-established plan, and he had nothing to worry about. It was only 6 months later that he learned about rumors in business circles that he was actually responsible for the deaths of the Diaz family. Susano called in his subordinates, and it was then that he discovered that Acacio had managed to transfer almost his entire business to him before his death, not just half of the brick factory they had discussed. His company, Start, had paid peanuts for multi-million-dollar assets, far below their actual value. How did this happen? He asked his subordinates in shock. Who prepared the documents? Who even ordered this? They invited the head of the legal department, Margarita Ortega, who later became his wife. Susano saw her for the first time then, although she had been working successfully for 7 months, as his subordinates assured him. I'm sorry, Susano, but you personally gave the order to prepare the documents and deliver them to Acacio Diaz, she calmly stated when the director called her to his office for a private conversation. It was more than 6 months ago. Maybe you've forgotten? You had so much on your plate at the time. She spoke with such confidence and looked at him with so much sympathy and understanding that Susano indeed began to doubt his memory. Could he have forgotten? After all, he wasn't that old, only 54 years old. However, some of his peers hadn't even made it to this age. How could he have messed up so badly and inadvertently taken his friend's business? And now he couldn't even ask him, he had perished with his wife. Due to the anniversary of the brick factory, which he had acquired not in the way he had wanted and which was linked to such tragic events, his depressive state had resurfaced. Susano felt awful inside. He poured himself some whiskey and downed it in one gulp. A pleasant warmth spread inside him. Susano repeated the action and again felt a moment of pleasant lightness. When he was about to pour the third glass of the expensive, strong drink, Margarita approached him. "Susano, the governor is leaving, you should see him off," Margarita said. "Well, then go and do it yourself," he replied louder than he should have. As his wife left the restaurant with the governor, Susano called over a waiter and ordered another bottle of whiskey. One of his security guards approached him. "Susano, you were planning to go home right after the governor left," the guard reminded him, leaning in close. "Are you going to give me orders?" The somewhat intoxicated boss protested. "Get away!" What followed was a string of expletives. Guests, some in surprise and others with mockery, stared at him. Susano shoved the security guard aside and headed for the restaurant's emergency exit. As drunk as he was, he understood very well that he didn't want to run into the departing governor. He passed through the restaurant's kitchen, knocking over some dishes and furniture along the way, and opened the door, finding himself in a dimly lit alley. The security guard tried to follow him. "Didn't I tell you where to go?" Susano shouted at him, and, after pushing him back inside, managed to close the door, using some heavy crates he had struggled to move. One of them jammed against the handle, wedging the door shut. "You think you can give me orders?" He proceeded down the alley, paying no heed to the security guard banging on the door and appealing to his reason. After a while of aimless wandering through unfamiliar, poorly lit alleyways, Susano realized he was lost. He found himself among old, variously constructed two-story buildings that had been repeatedly altered by their owners. A dog barked at him from behind a crooked fence, but then inexplicably fell silent. "Max!" He called out to the security guard, but, of course, there was no response. "Where am I?" Susano asked himself. "I need to make a call." To his surprise, he found himself holding a bottle of whiskey in one hand, which the waiter had brought just before he decided to leave. With another hand, Susano checked his pockets. His phone wasn't there. He had left it on the table. "Looks like I won't be able to make that call," he commented aloud in the absence of his phone. Just then, he heard footsteps behind him and turned around with joy, thinking that his security guard had finally found him. "Max," Susano said, then hesitated. Before him there were two entirely unfamiliar individuals who, as Susano saw them, appeared to be of questionable character. A solitary streetlight a few meters away weakly illuminated this part of the alley. Susano couldn't make out their details. Homeless or thugs? Susano quickly tried to discern as he sobbed. "Leo, check this out," one of them said, spitting as he spoke. He was a lanky man of indeterminate age, shining the light from his cell phone directly into Susano's face. "This rich guy's got some quality whiskey." "Young lads," Susano began, most importantly, squinting from the light and adjusting his slightly crooked tie, "could you please tell me how to get to Central Street? I seem to have gotten a bit lost." "Leo, imagine that, he's lost," the lanky one chortled. "Hush, Tin," the second one, stout and broad-shouldered, ordered. "Take whiskey and check his pockets." It seemed like they hadn't heard what Susano had just said to them. "I'm sorry," the businessman attempted to start his sentence again, but the lanky man snatched the bottle from his hands. "Take it, of course. But could you please tell me how to get?" "Shut up, old man." In the meantime, the lanky one was already rummaging through Susano's pockets. "Leo, it's empty," he disappointingly informed the stout one. "But there are some nice watches." "Take them." Susano obediently removed his wristwatch. "The jacket's not bad either," the stout one remarked. "Take it." Susano immediately agreed and handed them the jacket from his newly tailored suit, made just for the anniversary. "A bit oversized," noted the stout one as he put on the jacket. "What else do you have?" "Nothing more," Susano said in confusion. "Now, tell me, how can I get out of here?" "You're lying, old man," the lanky one said. "Take off the rings." Oh God, he had completely forgotten about the wide wedding ring and the ring with a large, flat, expensive stone, once given to him by his late wife, Valeriana. Susano tried to take them off, but apparently his fingers had swollen, and he couldn't manage it. "I can't," he said, resigning. "10, help the rich guy," the stout one commanded. The lanky one pulled out a knife. Its blade gleamed, illuminated by the full moon that had appeared from behind the clouds. Susano nervously swallowed. "If you help me get out of here, I'll reward you generously," he pleaded. "Yeah, we're not fools," the lanky one declared, grabbing his hand. "Help!" Susano cried out and received a powerful blow to his stomach that buckled him down in pain. The lanky man laughed, but unexpectedly, his laughter was cut short. "Who are you?" he asked someone. When Susano straightened up, he saw another person standing next to him, tall and strong. "Put away your knife and get lost," the unexpected defender stated. Susano, who had just lost hope for a favorable outcome in his encounter with the thugs, squared his shoulders. "And what if I don't?" the lanky one insolently retorted. "You'll find out now." Susano hadn't been in a fight since his college days, but it seemed his hands hadn't forgotten. Now that he had an unexpected partner, he had to make use of the chance to defend himself. He eagerly and forcefully struck the stout one in the jaw. Meanwhile, the lanky one was already on the ground, receiving blows from the stranger. Only Susano was immediately bombarded with a barrage of blows from the stout one. He tried to defend himself and strike back, but the odds were clearly against him, and soon the businessman couldn't stay on his feet any longer. He attempted to shield his face with his hands, but he received blows to various parts of his body. At first, it hurt badly, but then the pain dulled. And then he heard a siren and blacked out after taking a blow to the head. When he opened his eyes, he saw a man in a blue medical uniform shining a small flashlight in his face. "Where is he?" Susano asked. "The guy who stood up for me. They've already taken him to the hospital. His situation is more complicated than yours. He was stabbed." "Oh, God. It's because of me. Give me a phone, I need to call. Urgently." Susano lay on a comfortable bed in the VIP room of the Central Regional Hospital, enjoying an omelet with arugula, mozzarella, and tomatoes washed down with tomato juice. Occasionally, he glanced at the neighboring bed, where the young man who had come to his aid the previous night lay under a drip. He appeared to be around 30 years old, perhaps slightly older or younger. It was hard to tell due to his thick, untouched beard that clearly hadn't seen a barber's hand in a while. His dark hair also looked uncut and covered a rather high forehead. The man was covered with a blanket up to his chin, with only the hand to which the drip was attached lying on top of the blanket. It was evident that he was taller than average and had a robust build. After the surgery, he had yet to regain consciousness, and Susano had been patiently waiting for the moment when they could finally talk and he could thank him. "I'm doing surprisingly well," Susano thought to himself as he enjoyed his meal of omelet with arugula, mozzarella, and tomatoes washed down with tomato juice. He had multiple bruises and a mild concussion from the fight the previous day, but he felt remarkably fine. He had no nausea, and his head was barely hurting. The restaurant food pleased both his taste buds and his eyes. He was eager to get back home. How lucky he was that the young man hadn't been afraid to intervene. Thanks to him, Susano had regained his spirit and felt younger. Unfortunately, the young man himself hadn't escaped a knife wound. However, Susano had immediately ensured that the best doctors took care of them and placed them in the same room. "Do you think he wouldn't mind watching TV?" Susano asked a young nurse who was collecting dirty dishes. I think it should be fine, she said, smiling and handing him the remote. Susano pressed a button and turned on the large wall-mounted television. He landed on the local news. There was no mention of yesterday's incident in the crime report. His assistants had arranged with the police to keep Susano Vega's name out of any reports. Another nurse came in to disconnect the drip. Immediately, the young man in the neighboring bed opened his eyes. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Normal," he replied. He sat up slightly. "Am I in the hospital?" "Yes, you are, and you need to lie down," she commanded. "The doctor will be here soon. I'll let him know you've woken up." "Well, hello, my savior," Susano said as soon as the nurse left. "I'd like to shake your hand, but I can't get up myself, and you're supposed to be lying down. Thank you so much for stepping in for me last night. I don't even know how my encounter with those hooligans might have ended if you hadn't arrived in time to help." The young man responded to the greeting. He touched his abdomen under the blanket with his hand. "Did they operate on me?" "Yes, everything was done at the highest level. I took care of it. We'll find out from the doctor what you can eat now. You can order any dish from the restaurant menu. They'll be delivered as soon as possible. I'll cover the cost. I hope you don't mind." "No, I don't. By the way, my name is Susano Vega, owner of the Star Company. And how should I address you?" "Alejandro." "Alex. I don't know my last name. Are you saying you lost your memory before yesterday's fight?" Susano asked with concern. "No, this happened earlier." "How did this happen?" "I know very little about myself and what I remember. About a month ago, a compassionate old lady found me in the same area where the fight happened yesterday. How did I end up there? I don't know. I couldn't understand where I was. I didn't remember how I got there. I only remember that my name is Alex. The old lady, Gardenia, took pity on me and invited me to her home. I lived with her the whole last month, and last night I heard your cry for help and decided to intervene. And the lady probably called the police. Thank her very much. What are we going to do with you now?" Susano pondered for a moment. "Well, we'll figure it out. I'll help," he declared after a moment. Later, the doctor examined the young man and said that no vital organs had been affected and a speedy recovery could be expected. When Susano's daughter, Natalia, arrived, he noticed her curious and assessing gaze toward Alex. He introduced them to each other. "Who is this guy, and why are you sharing a room with him?" she whispered, leaning in close to her father's ear. "He saved me, Natalia," Susano replied in the same hushed tone. "Why did you go anywhere without Max at all?" she protested. "That's an inappropriate question. Don't dare to make claims against your father," Susano told his daughter. "Instead, tell us how your new project is going," he asked, now with a gentle smile. Natalia had finally decided to start her own, quite respectable business, which pleased her father greatly. However, she chose a non-family-oriented direction, a women's beauty salon and barbershop. In simple terms, it was a trendy and upscale barbershop for men. Margarita didn't like this venture at all, but her father willingly invested money in the project, as Natalia had previously been involved in even less promising ventures. Sometimes, she invested a substantial sum in a shelter for homeless animals, then got into yoga and poured a lot of money into a country club for enthusiasts and initiates. Then, she joined a green organization and poured even more funds into their events, some of which were at odds with the law. After an unauthorized rally during which a fight broke out, Natalia ended up in the police station, where she spent the whole night until her father bailed her out. Susano really wanted his daughter to learn how to earn money on her own. He considered it an important skill even for the daughter of a millionaire. "The salon will be opened next week," Natalia reported. "I was hoping to see you among the honored guests. Will you recover in time, or should I postpone the opening? I hope they'll release me home soon. And what does your savior do? Where does he live?" Natalia asked again, very quietly. Once again, her father noticed her keen interest in the young man, who seemed to be sleeping. Intrigued? Susano asked with a smile. He's a brave guy, and I appreciate people like that. I want to help him out and give him a chance to make something of himself. What does that mean? He helped me, and now I'll help him, Susano simply replied, then proceeded to tell his daughter about Alejandro's amnesia. Do you want to find his family? That's incidental, but there's no guarantee he even has one. Let him stay with us for now. With us? Are you serious? You're bringing a stranger into our home, or you'll settle him in one of your apartments. At the beginning, yes. Until he's back on his feet, I think he should stay in our house, Susano mused aloud. And from there, maybe he'll find a place for himself in our business. Dad, he's basically homeless, and you're bringing him home? Natalia exclaimed in an indignant whisper. Give him some money and let him be. It's enough that he's sharing a room with you. I've never seen you show such kindness to strangers before. No one ever saved me before. And besides, he reminds me a lot of someone. But that's not the point. Once in a lifetime, I want to genuinely help someone, and I have the means to do it. I can see that arguing with you is pointless, Natalia concluded. But if he's going to live in our house, we should at least clean him up. He already get up, the doctor allowed him to walk slowly. Then tomorrow, I'll bring my best barber. Let him do something decent with his hair and beard. I'm glad you're helping this good person too, Susano said with a satisfied smile. But we should ask him first. At this point, the young man turned to his side and opened his eyes. Alex, Natalia immediately addressed him. How would you feel about a bit of a makeover? I mean, and she mimicked scissors around her head and chin with her hands. I can bring a barber if you're okay with it. I'd be extremely grateful, the young man replied with a smile. The next day, Susano's daughter entered the room with a red-haired man of indeterminate age, dressed stylishly and fashionably. He glanced thoughtfully at Alejandro, stroking his neat beard, before finally starting to work. Susano chuckled as Natalia and the barber admired Alejandro's tall stature and muscular torso before draping him with a haircut apron. Even though his abdominal muscles were taped up, the rest of his body clearly showed that he was well aware of exercises or physical activities. While the barber was doing his magic on Alex's hair and beard, Natalia went to the shopping center. She returned shortly after with several bags from well-known brands. All right, this is clothing for you, she said, placing the bags near Alex's bed. I hope I got the size right. The transformation of Susano's savior was beyond commendable. The red-haired barber was pleased with his work. He handed Alejandro a mirror. Fantastic. Thank you, Alejandro exclaimed. The barber packed up his tools with a satisfied smile, said his goodbyes, and left. Natalia looked at the man sitting in the chair one more time. A completely different look. She praised the result. Would you like to try on some of the clothes? Let Alex rest, her father objected. Besides, it's time for lunch. They'll deliver food from the restaurant soon. All right. See you tomorrow. Natalia nodded to Alex and then fluttered out of the room. What do you think of my daughter? Susano proudly asked. Isn't she a beauty? There's no doubt in this, Alejandro agreed. But I can't seem to find a husband for her. She rejects all potential suitors. In the past, at her age, she would already have children, and she's still like a child herself. You're lucky to have a daughter like her, Alejandro commented. She's kind and open-hearted. My wife, Margarita, who's Natalia's stepmother, sees it differently. Sometimes she blames me for spoiling our daughter. Once, in anger, she called her an arrogant brat. Of course, I immediately warned her to watch her tongue when she spoke of my daughter, but maybe Margarita is right about something. I think she's mistaken. It's her subjective opinion. That's what I'd like to believe. It seems your wife comes from a less affluent family and has achieved everything herself. That's probably why Natalia irritates her. She grew up in different circumstances. You're right. And you seem to have a good understanding of people. Susano looked at the young man in surprise. A few days later, both Susano and his savior were discharged. With his stylish haircut and new clothes, Alex looked like a model from a fashion magazine. He carried himself with remarkable confidence and ease, as if he had always looked this good. "Father, do you mind if I steal Alex?" Natalia asked, unexpectedly appearing at the door of the room. "What? We were about to leave. The car is waiting for us, actually." "Why do you need him?" her father exclaimed. "I want to show him the salon and barbershop. The grand opening is in 3 days. I actually wanted to take some photos of Alex inside my salon to post on social media for promotional purposes," she explained. "You won't mind, will you?" She turned to the young man. "Not at all. Thanks for the opportunity to be of use. I believe in a balance of give and take. You've already given me a lot. I'd like to give something back to you. So feel free to use me for peaceful and kind purposes," Alejandro said with a smile. "Natalia, then you'll have to bring Alex home yourself," Susano ordered. "All right, but don't expect us anytime soon," Natalia said as she left. "We'll have lunch somewhere ourselves." She took Alex's hand, and they quickly headed for the exit. They spent the entire day together. They visited the salon and barbershop, where professional photographers took numerous pictures of Alex from different angles against various backgrounds and settings. After the photo shoot, they had lunch at a restaurant and took a drive around the city. Natalia talked nonstop, sharing details about her past projects and the prospects of her budding business. It was evident that she was very passionate about her new venture. Meanwhile, Alejandro just smiled and listened attentively, never taking his eyes off her. Natalia couldn't help but keep her eyes on Alejandro throughout the day. He looked stunning. Her efforts were not in vain. But it was essential to acknowledge his natural beauty as well. What surprised her the most was that he seemed completely at ease in her familiar surroundings, as if he had always lived this way. Alex gallantly offered his hand, held doors open, and pulled out her chair at the restaurant. He navigated the restaurant menu expertly, ordering dishes that might be unfamiliar to the average person. Who is he really? Natalia wondered in amazement. "What can you tell me about yourself?" she asked in a coffee shop they visited before heading home. "I've been talking all day, and you've been quiet." "Unfortunately, there's not much to tell," he replied. "Father mentioned that you have amnesia. How do you cope with it?" "I hope that someday I'll remember everything. Promise that I'll be the first person you tell about yourself." "All right," Alejandro agreed with a smile. The beautiful country house of Vega's family had 3 floors, with bedrooms, a library, a grand reception hall, a new billiard room, a swimming pool, a conservatory, a summer terrace, and rooms for assistants. Alejandro was offered to choose a room on any floor. "Mine is on the top floor," Natalia whispered in his ear, "and there are 2 guest bedrooms nearby. One of them is very comfortable." "Then lead the way," Alex replied in a whisper. "We're heading upstairs," Natalia informed her father and led the guest to the elevator. "Don't take too long," Susano shouted after them. "Come down for dinner in 20 minutes." The elevator with glass doors took the young couple to the 3rd floor. "Here, we have a small library, a mini gym with exercise equipment, and, most importantly, fantastic views from the windows," Natalia explained as she led Alex to the bedrooms. "This is my room," she said, pointing to one of the doors. "I usually live in my city apartment, but I do stay in my parents' house from time to time, especially when Margarita is away. I try to avoid crossing paths with her. We can't stand each other, and I'm glad our rooms are on different floors. But I would recommend you take this bedroom. Or would you like to see both guest rooms?" "I trust your choice," Alejandro said with the same wonderful smile. The room had a large bed and beautiful furniture, and it was bright, spacious, and cozy. The guest liked it, as well as the entire house. There's a bathroom here, Natalia pointed to one of the doors, and a walk-in closet, which we'll need to fill with your things that we'll buy. The three of them had dinner together. Margarita had been detained in the city. The atmosphere was relaxed and pleasant. Susano couldn't recall such an easygoing and enjoyable dinner conversation since Valeriana's passing. His daughter was clearly in a good mood, which had been a rarity lately. She rarely sat at the table with Margarita. It's even better that my wife isn't home, Susano thought. Your chef cooks incredibly delicious food, Alejandro exclaimed as he served himself a second helping of the meat roulade. Yes, Gardenia is excellent at preparing the most exquisite dishes, Susano agreed. She has been working for us for a long time, and we are very satisfied. It's just that Margarita is often hard to please. Please, let's not spoil dinner by talking about her, Natalia requested, and her mood visibly soured. I'll have coffee in my room, she announced, getting up from the table and taking a large mug with her. I shouldn't have let that slip, Susano lamented. We were getting along so well. After dinner, Alejandro took the stairs to the third floor and entered the library. He examined the book spines, selected one, and settled into a comfortable chair beside a floor lamp. A pleasant breeze wafted in from the open window. The young man immersed himself in reading and didn't notice when Natalia approached him. What are you reading? She asked. Alejandro showed her the book cover. Seriously? She raised her eyebrows in surprise. You're reading Matsuo Basho in the original? Do you know Japanese? It turns out I do, Alex simply replied. Impressive. Do you mind if I sit here nearby? Won't I disturb you? No, of course not. I'll be glad for your company. Would you like me to read it aloud? He asked. And Alejandro read several lines in Japanese. Japanese sounds quite amusing to me. I could never get the hang of it. By the way, do you remember where you learned this language? I like that I know it. And you have this book in your library. It was a gift from real Japanese people to my dad. I used to be into haikus, but that passed quickly. The book remained. Can you translate the last one you read? The girl asked. He said. Frost covers him. The wind makes his bed cold. An abandoned child. It's like it's about me, Natalia said sadly. I often feel like an abandoned child. It's been that way since my mother's death. I'm sorry, Alejandro said softly. He put the book aside and took the girl's hand. I'd like to take a walk through your garden paths. Would you like to come with me? That's a great idea. Natalia perked up. I'll show you everything. They walked through the garden late into the night, discussing literature, music, and art. It turned out that Alejandro knew a lot of interesting things about these subjects, and Natalia listened to him, not hiding her amazement. Margarita returned while they were walking, much to the girl's delight, as she had been avoiding her stepmother. And in the morning, Margarita left before Alejandro and Natalia came down for breakfast. Susano finished his coffee, staring at his phone with a deeply troubled expression. What's wrong, Dad? Natalia asked, wishing her father a good morning. My interpreter fell ill at the worst possible time, her father replied, nodding in greeting to his daughter and the guest. And today the Japanese are coming to finalize the contract. Now my assistants are urgently looking for a replacement for her. We have only 3 hours for everything. Do you need a Japanese translator? Natalia asked, taking a seat at the table, with Alex pulling out a chair for her. I suppose they understand English as well, Susano said without looking up from his phone. Alex knows Japanese and possibly English too, Natalia stated. Is that true? Susano tore his gaze away from his mobile and stared at Alejandro. Yes, the young man replied modestly. Can you be our translator for the negotiations with the Japanese today? I can, if my candidacy suits you. Alex, you saved me again. Susano exclaimed with joy. He quickly sent a text message and, placing the phone on the table, enthusiastically ate a sandwich with caviar. "You're saving me one more time." "Well done." Alejandro smiled and began his breakfast. "We also need to figure out your document situation," Susano pondered. "I'll use my connections to officially get you a passport. We need to decide on a last name. What if I say you're a distant relative of ours? We'll register you as Vega. What do you say?" "I agree," replied Alejandro. "Great. After signing the contract with the Japanese, we'll take care of your documents right away. Natalia," he addressed his daughter, "please find some formal clothing for Alex for today's meeting." "Sure," Natalia said. Once her father had left, Alex looked at her intently. "Are you angry with me?" she asked, her tone now serious. "No," he replied with a smile. "Let's get ready, we don't have much time." The day passed. Natalia stretched out with a smile on the large bed in Alex's room. He was taking a shower. She wasn't in a hurry to get up, it was such a wonderful morning. She called the maid and asked her to bring coffee and pastries to Alex's room. Yesterday, after the successful signing of the contract with the Japanese, Susano invited all the participants to dine at a restaurant. Natalia, dressed in a black, luxurious floor-length dress, had joined them. With Alejandro, who was wearing a sharp dark suit, a white shirt, and a tie, they looked very harmonious together. They had driven home in Natalia's car, and at first, they had gone to their separate rooms. However, within 2 minutes, Natalia had quickly entered Alex's room. He had already taken off his jacket and shirt. She kissed him decisively, and passion immediately consumed them both. Natalia remembered the previous night with a smile on her face and heard a knock on the door. "Yes, come in." She was hoping it was the maid with coffee, but when she opened the door, it was her father. "What are you doing here?" he asked in surprise. "I'm waiting for Maria to bring coffee," Natalia replied, sounding disappointed. She didn't want to publicize her relationship with Alex, at least not now. And here, her father appeared at the most inconvenient moment. "What did you want?" she asked. "I wanted to see Alex." "But maybe later," Susano closed the door on his side. "Damn!" Natalia exclaimed. "He's ruined my morning." She was annoyed at the thought that her father might want to talk about their relationship. But when she later met him in the dining room, he acted as if nothing had happened, and she felt relieved. Susano himself wasn't sure how to act. After all, he was the one who brought Alex into the house. Moreover, his daughter had gone to him in the guest's room. But it wasn't surprising. Last night, sparks had not only flown between the young people, but lightning had also flashed. It was too obvious. With a thoughtful expression, he drove to the office that morning. "You know, Margarita," he said to his wife, who was sitting next to him in the back seat, "I think it's high time my daughter got married." "Have you found her a groom?" His wife chuckled. "She gets along wonderfully with Alex. So let them get married." Susano voiced the thought that had formed in his mind. "Are you ready to marry your daughter to a homeless person?" His wife asked in surprise. "You know nothing about this Alex, except his name and what he told you." "You're wrong," Susano replied. "He has already pleasantly surprised me in many ways, starting with his knowledge of Japanese." "I still think it's a bad idea," his wife snorted. But Susano had already decided to talk to his daughter. After the grand opening of the beauty salon and barbershop during the reception for the honored guests, he saw once again how Alex and Natalia looked at each other with love. In the evening, back at home, he asked his daughter to come to his office. "Natalia, we need to talk," he began. "Please, don't teach me life." The girl sharply interrupted him. "I'm already an adult and have the right to a personal life in which you don't have to interfere." "Wait a moment, my dear. Perhaps you'll like it." "What are you talking about?" Natalia asked, surprised. "I don't mind if you and Alex get married." "Again? Do you want to marry me off to a good man?" His daughter protested. Before, you wanted to match me with the sons of your business partners, and now you're ready to marry me off to someone you barely know. But that doesn't stop you from sleeping with him. It's still not a reason for marriage. I don't want to get married at all. That's your spirit of contradiction talking. I can see that you get along perfectly. I would even say that there are feelings between you two. It's noticeable. And Alex is a good person. So why not start a family? I have other plans for my life, Natalia retorted. We can make some adjustments to them, her father said. And doesn't it bother you that Alex has nothing in his name? But I have more than enough, Susano replied seriously. And I will give him a brick factory as a wedding gift. That way, he will have a business to develop. He definitely has a head on his shoulders. Besides, everything is well organized there, and I will be informed of his decisions, so everything will be under control. And me too? Do you want that too? Natalia protested, getting more and more upset. Yes, I'm willing to entrust you to him. He passed the test. He stood up for me, risking his life. That means he won't let anyone harm you either. Natalia, come on, admit that you like him yourself? Her father asked more gently. I can see how you look at him. Dad, I imagined all of this differently, the whole courtship leading up to the wedding, Natalia said more calmly. I wanted declarations of love and a proper proposal in a romantic setting. And here, my own father is trying to make me marry a guy, like I'm some unwanted item. You're right. Let Alex make you a proper proposal. According to your instructions? That's not your concern. Just don't dare to refuse him. I can see that he has feelings for you. He just understands that you come from different worlds, so he'll never take a decisive step. But now he's also in our world, and I'll tell him about it. Natalia waved her hand and left her father's office. In reality, she was genuinely in love with Alejandro, but her father's approach to her personal life seemed unacceptable to her. Anger overwhelmed her. She entered her room and locked the door. She put on headphones and started listening to music. She didn't hear when Alejandro approached the door and knocked softly. And when she didn't open the door, he quietly went downstairs to meet Susano, who had called him for a conversation. From the large windows of the bedroom on the 24th floor, there was a fantastic view of the nighttime city. Alex took off his jacket, hung it on the back of a chair, and cast his gaze on the king-sized bed. Today was his wedding day with Natalia. They were about to have their first night after the wedding, the most joyful and eagerly anticipated moment for two loving hearts. But the young husband had a heavy heart. When Susano invited him to his office 3 months ago, he couldn't have imagined what kind of conversation awaited him. Alex, what I'm about to say might seem strange to you, Susano began. But I would like you and Natalia to get married. Wait, listen to me to the end. I see that you have developed a close relationship, and I see how my daughter has changed for the better because of you. Our relationship with her has also improved. And I've grown very fond of you. You're like a son to me. I propose that you legally become part of our family. As a wedding gift, I will transfer the brick factory to you. It's a thriving, highly profitable business that you can develop as you wish. Natalia already has an apartment in the city. But if you both want your own country house, we can arrange that too. There's plenty of space in this house. What do you say? How do you feel about my daughter? Susano, I'm ready to admit that I've come to love your daughter, Alejandro stated. And, as far as I can tell, she has feelings for me too. I'm sincerely glad that you're willing to entrust her future to me, but I don't know if she'll accept my proposal. Well, find out. Buy her a ring and make a proposal in a romantic setting. Women appreciate that. Well, I think you'll figure it out yourself. And, as they say, I bless your union. After signing the contract with the Japanese, Susano handed Alex a bank card, saying that he had earned this money honestly. Checking the balance, the young man saw a significant sum for a few hours of work as a translator. These funds would be enough for a ring and all the other attributes of a romantic evening. He didn't know if Natalia would agree, but he was more concerned about something else. With the girl he had come to love, Alejandro hadn't been entirely honest, and he still hadn't mustered the courage to tell her the truth. Natalia accepted his proposal with joy. And now, 3 months later, they were legally husband and wife. During this time, their feelings had only grown stronger. Alejandro was already working at the brick factory that Susano gifted him, successfully fulfilling his role as its leader. He quickly grasped the production processes, and profits were increasing. It seemed that there was no need to change anything in life now that it had taken such a turn. But for some reason, it was only after the wedding that Alejandro realized he had to tell his lawful wife everything and regretted not doing it sooner. "Darling, will you help me take off my dress?" Natalia approached him from behind and embraced him. "I can't manage it myself," she added playfully. "I need to talk to you," Alejandro said decisively, turning away from the window and looking Natalia directly in the eyes. "What's with that look?" "You're scaring me," the bride said, visibly concerned. "I envisioned our wedding night differently. Did you remember something from your past life?" "Let's sit down," the young man suggested. He seated Natalia on the bed and took a chair, placing it opposite her. "I must confess to you that I never lost my memory." "It was all a pretense," he began. "What?" Natalia looked at him in astonishment. "Who are you, and why did you pretend? Does the name Diaz mean anything to you?" "My dad had a friend with that name. I think his name was—" She paused, trying to remember. "Acacio," Alejandro finished for her. "And I am his son. But why did you hide this from me?" Natalia was shocked. "Your father, Susano Vega, is responsible for the deaths of my parents. He wanted to take over our family business and destroy our entire family. He succeeded in the first part, and in the second, my parents died. I lived abroad for a long time, studying and working. My father's associates advised me not to return home, fearing that your father would reach me. But eventually, I came back. I wanted to avenge their deaths. I hated your father so much that I was willing to kill him." "Alex, what are you saying? My father couldn't have been involved in the deaths of your parents." "How do you know?" "He used his connections to force my father to sign papers, transferring almost all of his business. But that wasn't enough for him, so he killed them." "Stop, please. I want to tell you everything. I returned to my hometown a few months ago, hoping to confront Susano. But I could only observe him from a distance because he was always surrounded by security. I lived in the most remote area of the city. I still had some money in my accounts, but I was advised not to withdraw anything so that no one would remember me. On the evening of the fight, I was watching your father. I thought that the time had come when I could carry out my plan." "Did you really want to kill him?" Natalia exclaimed in horror. "Yes, that's exactly what I wanted," Alejandro replied. "Then why did you stand up for him? If those thugs hadn't killed him, they would have severely hurt him. I couldn't allow that. This is my revenge. I have a strong reason for it. They have no right to treat Susano like that. I don't understand anything. You risked your life to protect my father, only to kill him later? At first, I couldn't allow someone else to do it. But then the fight didn't end the way I expected. I got injured. Your father stepped in to help me, and his attitude towards me made me doubt whether he was really as ruthless and greedy as my father's deputies, whom I considered family friends, had convinced me. I decided not to take any action. Suddenly, I wanted to get to know your father better. But I couldn't reveal who I really was, and amnesia was the first thing that came to mind. The more I learned about Susano, the more I doubted that he was capable of ruthlessly disposing of my parents. Why did you marry me then? I fell in love with you. That's the truth. And now you no longer want to avenge your parents' deaths? You don't blame my father for anything? My feelings towards him have changed, thanks to you. He doesn't even seem like a murderer. Maybe he's innocent of my parents' deaths. I want to help you figure this out. I'm sure my father is not involved, and I'm ready to assist you in discovering it." Tears glistened in Natalia's eyes. Alex knelt down and took her hands in his. "You've given meaning to my life," he said, kissing her fingers. "When I first saw you in the hospital room, I thought I could spend my entire life with a woman like you. I didn't even notice how I fell in love with you," Natalia said, running her hand through his hair. "Now you know who I am. Do you regret marrying me?" "Quite the opposite. I've always been tormented by the question, who are you really, and what was your past? I was afraid that this past would catch up with us, and it would turn out that you have obligations to people you don't remember. Everything has finally fallen into place, and we'll uncover the truth together. Shall I help you take off your dress?" Alex suggested. He carefully unbuttoned Natalia's dress from the back, kissing every inch of her body. When the dress slipped to the floor, he embraced his wife tightly. Ironically, Alejandro became the owner of the company that had once caused a dispute between his father and Susano. And now he had to figure out what had really happened. For several days, he went through documents, cross-referencing numbers and dates, checking reports, plans, and everything else that might help him unravel the mystery that had been tormenting him. Often, he found the signature of Susano's second wife, Margarita, on the documents. As he discovered, her maiden name was Ortega. She had been the head of the legal department when his father was forced to sign the documents. However, later, after marrying Susano, a significant part of the Start Company came under her control, including the majority of the assets, including Acacio Diaz Enterprise. "Natalia, your stepmother seems to be connected to all this business we're in," Alejandro told his wife over dinner. "I think we should find out where she goes outside of work and who she meets," she replied. "I have a reliable person who can find out everything." A few days later, the spouses received a report with photos showing where Margarita went and what she did outside of her office. It turned out that she had been meeting one of Alejandro's father's deputies, one of those who had convinced him of Susano's guilt in the death of the Diaz family. Additionally, it was revealed that Margarita's masseur was her lover, as evidenced by photos of their meetings at a massage salon. "She's cheating on Dad," Natalia exclaimed. "I'll give him these photos. Let him deal with her." "The fact of her infidelity is clear," Alex agreed. "But her involvement in the deaths of my parents still remains uncertain." Margarita was sitting in her chair, clenching her fists. She had been going towards her goal for a long time, and she was so close. Her plan could have been executed in the very near future, but now this damned savior Alejandro has intervened. Where had he come from anyway? Everything could have gone perfectly if it weren't for that night when Susano got drunk and left without security, and this damn savior appeared out of nowhere. And now he has even taken over the brick factory. That was the critical piece she needed for her plans. Margarita was 10 years old when her father hanged himself. Doctors said that prolonged depression and his refusal to seek treatment were the reasons for his suicide. Her mother believed differently. Her father had worked at that same brick factory for over 20 years. He started as a simple laborer right after finishing school. Eventually, he became the deputy director. Rodrigo Medina fought until the end to keep the factory open. Only the director decided otherwise and simply gave up. That's when Margarita's father intended to buy the factory himself, conspiring with his colleagues at the plant. But two young upstarts, Susano Vega and Acacio Diaz, intercepted the purchase. They paid more. Her mother was sure that they paid bribes. As a result, her father was left with nothing. They invited all the colleagues with whom he had wanted to purchase the enterprise to the newly reopened factory. However, they didn't invite Margarita's father. He was simply forgotten. His pride wouldn't allow him to remind them of himself. He dedicated nearly a quarter of a century to the beloved factory, Margarita's mother said with tears in her eyes after her husband's death. Should he go and beg for a place there? Beg on his knees? Not in a million years. Let those wretched upstarts choke on their own greed. But remember this, my girl, Susano Vega and Acacio Diaz are the ones responsible for your father's death. Those two devils. Years went by, and every time a news segment about the latest achievements of these businessmen appeared in the local newspaper or on television, Margarita's mother, with tears in her eyes, repeated that if it weren't for them burying her father, Margarita would be living like a princess. Instead, they barely made ends meet and struggled to survive. Her mother worked herself to exhaustion, and she passed away early, leaving Margarita, who had just turned 18, all alone. After finishing school, Margarita enrolled in a legal college and later in an institute. She strived to excel academically, and one thought occupied her mind: the guilty parties responsible for her father's death would be punished, and their successful enterprises would be passed on to Margarita. She changed her last name from Medina to Ortega, her mother's maiden name, so that her family's enemies wouldn't suspect her true identity. Her journey to work at the Start Company was challenging. She had to become the best in her field to secure a position there. Experience was necessary, and Margarita worked diligently, constantly practiced, pursued further education, and improved her qualifications. When a vacancy opened up in the legal department, she could have become its head, but the position was already occupied. She started as a regular lawyer, brilliantly passing the interview. In less than a month, when the head of the department unexpectedly passed away, she was appointed to the position because she had already won the favor of everyone in the company who had a say in the appointment. During this time, Susano's wife was seriously ill, and Susano himself had a conflict with Acacio. A plan immediately formed in Margarita's mind on how to use this situation to her advantage so that Acacio's business would transfer to Susano. And beyond that, she was ready to go further. And she did. But first, she prepared the documents and hired people who made Acacio sign them. These individuals had no connection to the Start Company, but everything appeared as if Susano sent them. Furthermore, one of Acacio's deputies fell under Margarita's influence and agreed to help her. Nevertheless, she was still taking a considerable risk. The truth could come out at any moment. Susano was in Israel with his ailing wife, but upon his return, he could have met with Acacio, and then everything would have been exposed. The accident, however, closed the case. It was staged on Margarita's orders. This way, she got rid of one of the culprits in her father's death, and all his assets went to Susano. After his wife's death, he handed over all the reins of the company to his deputies, among whom Margarita had already gained their trust. The first deputy had become her lover. So, she was well aware of all the financial matters, and the legal support went directly through her. When Susano finally realized that he had become the owner of Acacio's business, he tried to figure out how this had happened if he wasn't informed about it. At this point, Margarita panicked, but she didn't show it during their face-to-face meeting. Instead, she attempted to use her feminine charm to the fullest. To her immeasurable delight, it worked. Susano became actively interested in her. Through clever manipulation, she intensified his interest with each new encounter. Soon, Susano yearned for her affection and consolation, and she willingly played the role of a loving and understanding woman. No one knew what it cost her, but it was an essential part of achieving her goal. All of Acacio's assets transferred to Susano, and now they would also pass to her, along with all of Susano's assets. To achieve this, she had to become his wife, and she succeeded. How much she longed to settle scores with her husband's detested daughter. However, she had to patiently wait for the right moment. Only sometimes, her nerves got the better of her, and she said more than she should have to Susano about his daughter. Margarita found Natalia infuriating, a pampered and spoiled idler. She had everything handed to her on a silver platter. Margarita could have had herself if her father had managed to become the owner of the brick factory that Acacio and Susano had shamelessly taken away from him, ultimately driving him to suicide. Margarita managed to turn the daughter against her father, and vice versa. In time, she planned to completely disinherit this pampered doll with her own hands. But now she was married, and this Alejandro was quite complicated. Margarita's biggest concern was that no one knew who he really was or where he had come from. It was evident to her that he was genuinely in love with Natalia, and Natalia was in love with him. This complicated the task. The brick factory was already out of Margarita's hands. She couldn't allow Susano to decide to gift his daughter and son-in-law with something else. She needed to take action. She needed to ensure that the start company ended up in Margarita's hands. But how? This very question was swirling in her mind when her detested husband unexpectedly entered her office. He looked like hell. "My dear, how happy I am to see you." Margarita said it with a radiant smile. "Has something happened?" "Don't rejoice in vain," Susano shouted. Demanding explanations, he threw a stack of photographs onto her desk. Someone had taken photos of Margarita in a massage parlor with her young lover. This young man, the masseur, was her escape. Otherwise, she would have gone mad from her constant revulsion for Susano and his daughter. "What does this mean? Tell me," Susano roared. Margarita desperately tried to come up with something, but everything was too obvious to be refuted. She realized she was backed into a corner, and all her plans to destroy Susano had crumbled. "A foolish question, Susano," she said calmly. "In these photos, I'm simply enjoying my time with a young man. After all, according to their prenuptial agreement, she would receive a decent settlement, and then she would come up with a new plan. If she couldn't take over the entire business, at least she could wipe Susano off the face of the earth, just as she had done with his late friend Acacio." "How long have you been cheating on me?" Susano asked. "How long do you think I could endure life with you?" Margarita replied with disdain, her face contorted with a grimace of hatred. "I'm a young, attractive woman, and you're balding, overweight, and completely devoid of male appeal. And you think that my married life with you could bring me joy and happiness? Why did you marry me then?" Susano asked, bewildered, his righteous anger turning into hurt. "You wanted money?" "No, my dear, I wanted more," Margarita said, covering her face with her hands. "If you only knew how much I hate you, how every day I dream of your death." "But why?" Susano asked, utterly confused. "My father's surname is Medina. Ortega is my mother's maiden name. Do you remember Rodrigo Medina?" "I don't recall anything familiar," Susano said, even more perplexed. "You don't even remember him, yet he hanged himself because of you and Acacio." "Oh, you mean Rodrigo. I remember him now. But wait, I don't understand. He told us he changed his mind about buying the brick factory. We invited him to work with us, but he declined." "I don't believe you," Margarita screamed, seething with anger. "You and Acacio ruined my father's life, and I wanted to take revenge on you more than anything in the world. And I almost succeeded. At least with Acacio." "So, you were involved in the deaths of Acacio and Marina?" Susano exclaimed in astonishment. "It's a shame you and your little princess weren't in the same car." Margarita grabbed her purse and rushed out of the office. She was trembling. She couldn't utter another word. She sped through the entire floor like a bullet, took the elevator down to the underground parking, and got into her car. Tears blurred her vision. A terrible pain gnawed at her soul. She wished she could turn back time. It was unbearable. Margarita let out a furious roar and pressed the gas pedal. The car shot forward. Her phone rang. It was Acacio's deputy, the one who had helped her get rid of him on the road. But now, he kept demanding money and the promised position at start from Margarita. She smirked maliciously. His plans for the promised future collapsed today, just like hers. "I urgently need to meet with you," he shouted into the phone. "All right, I'll come right away." Tears were streaming down her face. The car was racing at high speed. Margarita didn't know what to do next or how to go on living. She had wanted so badly to take revenge on those who had ruined her life, but nothing had worked out. She found herself in a broken mess. How painful it was to realize this. How painful. And then there was a sudden impact and the screeching of metal. She didn't even understand what had happened. Then there was instant death and darkness. A year passed. Gardenia was busy at the stove. Dinner was almost ready, but she needed to add a few finishing touches to the potatoes. She liked everything to be perfect. Gardenia, Katerina can finish that. Come sit at the table, Susano called her. It was a family dinner. Only the closest family members were gathered around the table, Natalia with Alejandro, and Gardenia with her husband and granddaughter. The past year has been challenging for the Vega family. Gardenia had found traditional remedies to support Susano, not just pills and injections. She made an effort to cook the dishes he especially liked. He spent a lot of time at home, handing over control of the company to his son-in-law, who turned out to be Acacio Diaz's son, which was another shock for Susano. Now his daughter carried the surname of his long-lost friend. Alejandro and Natalia, of course, didn't tell Susano that their future son-in-law had initially wanted to kill him. Too many unpleasant events and revelations had shaken his health. They were all relieved that, as the household cook, Gardenia had unexpectedly found a pleasant conversation partner for herself and a caring woman devoid of selfish ambitions. Gardenia was the same age as Susano. They shared many interests, and their values aligned. Both considered family to be the most important thing in life. Gardenia had been widowed 15 years ago. She had a daughter, whom she had successfully married off, and then a granddaughter was born. For over 10 years, she had worked for Vegas and valued her position. She liked the family until Margarita came into it. Despite wanting to leave immediately after Vegas' remarriage, Gardenia stayed and decided to adapt. She simply did her job honestly, ignoring Margarita's unfounded remarks. After Margarita's death, Susano wanted to provide support, but it turned out that unexpected feelings had developed between them. A month ago, Susano proposed, and Gardenia accepted. At his request, she found Katerina, who replaced her in the kitchen. The mistress of the big house preferred to cook some dishes herself. Gardenia, please have a seat. Susano got up from the table and led his wife into the dining room. I have a toast. He raised a glass of red wine. I'm very glad that we're all together today, he said, nodding to Alejandro and Gardenia's son-in-law. And that soon, there will be more of us. He looked significantly at his daughter, who had her hand on her pregnant belly. I'm glad that my personal life has become happy, he kissed his wife's hand, that the people close to me get along. I'm happy that my daughter's business is thriving. Sweetheart, your beauty salon and barbershop have turned out to be successful ventures. I'm happy that I can hand over my business to you with a light heart, Alex, he turned to the young man, especially since part of it is rightfully yours. Thank you all for being with me today. To you, my dear family. Susano was sitting at the table with an absolutely happy expression, thinking about how wonderfully his life had turned out. He had been through a lot, but now he felt extraordinarily light and free.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.